Why did the desert go silent the moment the gunfire stopped? Sarah McKenna lay half-buried in sand and broken glass, the world ringing in her ears like it had cracked open. The Humvee that had carried her team only seconds earlier was now twisted metal on its side, still ticking as it cooled. Somewhere in the distance, engines roared, retreating. Protocol. Extraction under fire. Leave what you can't carry. She understood it. That didn't make it hurt less. Blood ran warm down her temple, mixing with dust, turning it into mud on her cheek. She forced herself to breathe. In, out, slow. Panic wastes oxygen. Panic kills faster than bullets. She rolled onto her stomach and crawled free of the wreck, every muscle screaming. Her rifle was still strapped across her chest. Thank God. Her radio was crushed, dead weight. Her water bladder had ruptured, soaking uselessly into the sand. She watched the last drops disappear and felt something inside her tighten. Not fear. Math. The desert didn't care who she was. She checked the bodies she already knew were gone. Hayes, Grant, names that would echo later when survival wasn't the only thing that mattered. She allowed herself 3 seconds. Then she stood. Movement was coming. Engines, voices, they'd expect bodies, or worse, captives. Sarah moved. She didn't run. Running left tracks. She slid low into the folds of the land, using shadow and memory and instincts older than her uniform. The desert smelled the same as it had when she was 13, standing in an Arizona creek bed with her grandfather, frustrated and thirsty. "You're looking with your eyes," he'd said. "The desert teaches you to look with your mind." She followed darker sand, rock patterns, wind-scoured stone. Her shoulder burned where a round had kissed muscle, but she ignored it. Pain was information. She could use information. When the first patrol followed her blood trail exactly where she wanted them, she almost felt sorry for them. Almost. She waited until the sun blinded them and the wind settled. 4 shots, 4 seconds, silence again. And suddenly she was truly alone. Had she always been this alone? She remembered Hell Week, the cold Pacific chewing through bone, men twice her size breaking down, crying, quitting. She stayed, not because she was stronger, because she'd promised someone she wouldn't quit. That promise followed her now, whispering through the heat shimmer and the dry wind. McKenna's don't quit. But even she wondered, how long could we outrun dehydration? The desert answered with more engines. And the hunt began. What kind of enemy pauses a pursuit out of respect? Sarah heard his voice before she ever saw him, calm, precise, edged with experience. The accent wasn't local, Eastern Europe, military, not cartel bravado. "This is not ordinary prey," he warned his men over the radio. She smiled without humor. He understood. That made him dangerous. She moved like a ghost, striking where it hurt, never where it was expected. She stole water, maps, radios, knowledge. Each ambush bought her minutes. Minutes became hours. Hours became a fragile lead. But the wound in her shoulder festered. Heat and dirt were conspiring quietly, patiently. Infection didn't announce itself like gunfire. It crept. At night, when movement slowed, memories came faster. Her grandfather's hands digging into dry earth, water appearing where logic said there shouldn't be any. Survival isn't strength, he'd told her. It's will. She wondered if will could fight bacteria. When she heard the name, Colonel Anton Vyulov, she understood what she was facing. A professional, someone who still believed in codes even while selling them. He spoke to her directly eventually, offered surrender, not mockery, not threats, a soldier's calculus. "You're wounded," he said. "You're alone, this ends one way." She answered honestly. "I've heard that math before." She didn't surrender. Instead, she turned his terrain against him. Water sources became traps. Safe houses became graves. She never stayed long enough to be cornered, never struck without purpose. No wasted movement, no wasted bullets. Still the fever rose. By the third night, she knew she was losing, not tactically but biologically. And Vyulov knew it too. That's when he did something unexpected. He left her a radio. What kind of enemy gives you a way out? Sarah watched the radio for hours. No movement, no signal, no trap she could see, just an American military handset sitting on a rock like an unanswered question. Using it meant admitting something she hated. That she couldn't win alone. Her grandfather's voice came back, not stern, not disappointed. Courage isn't dying brave, it's living smart. She crawled to the radio under a moonless sky, fever blurring the edges of the world. When the voice answered clear, American, real, her knees almost gave out. "They're coming," they said. 25 minutes. An eternity. Vyulov intercepted the call, didn't stop it, didn't interfere. "You earned this," he told her, soldier to soldier. But others wouldn't honor that. The cartel came fast, loud, angry. Sarah made her stand on a rocky ridge, barely conscious, counting rounds she might not finish. Bullets tore stone inches from her face. She returned fire because stopping meant dying. When the rotors thundered overhead, she didn't feel relief. She felt release. Hands dragged her into the helicopter. Water burned going down. The desert fell away beneath her like a dream she'd barely survived. She caught one last glimpse of headlights in the distance, stationary. Vyulov keeping his word. What do you feel when you survive something you should? In the hospital, recovery came in pieces. Antibiotics, fluids, silence. Names spoken gently, names not spoken at all. She didn't feel like a legend. She felt hollow. They told her what she'd done would be studied, taught, debated, used to end arguments about who belonged. She asked for medals for the dead instead. When the package arrived, no return address, she knew who it was from. A medal, old, tarnished, respect sent across enemy lines. She didn't report it. Some things belonged to warriors alone. Months later, she stood in front of new candidates, 4 of them women, nervous, watching her like she was proof of something. She told them the truth. That fear never leaves. That strength isn't loud. That survival isn't about glory. It's about refusing to quit quietly. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes, when the world tells you to retreat, you survive anyway. Why did the silence after the first kill feel heavier than the gunshot itself? Sarah McKenna didn't move for a long moment after the last body hit the sand. She stayed pressed into the rock, cheek against stone, still warm from the day's heat, rifle steady, eyes searching for the mistake that would get her killed. Training said move immediately. Instinct said wait. The desert had a way of punishing impatience. Nothing came. No shouts, no return fire, just wind sliding across the open ground and the faint metallic echo fading into nothing. 4 men down. 4 lives ended in less time than it took her heart to settle. That was when it hit her, not pride, not triumph. Wait. Killing alone was different. There was no teammate to glance at, no nod of shared understanding, no quiet acknowledgement that the decision had been necessary. It was just her, the rifle, and the consequence. She swallowed hard and pushed it down. There would be time later to feel, if there was a later. She moved fast then, efficient and deliberate. Search, strip, take what mattered, leave what didn't, water first. She found it on the 3rd body, 6 full liters sloshing softly in plastic containers. Relief surged through her so sharply it almost made her dizzy. She forced herself to ration immediately. 1 swallow, that's it. Discipline now meant survival later. She took the radio next, hands hesitating for half a second before unclipping it. Active. Encrypted. Voices crackled faintly when she adjusted the volume. Knowledge was oxygen, but knowledge cut both ways. If she could hear them, they could find her. She set it to receive only and moved on. The truck nearby was tempting, keys still in the ignition. 40 miles north and she'd hit the border maybe. But the image unraveled as quickly as it formed. Roadblocks, drones, open terrain. A vehicle made you loud, made you predictable, made you dead. No, she would disappear instead. Sarah slipped back into the land, moving where tracks didn't hold. Rocky washes, hard-packed earth, places her grandfather had taught her to favor. Every step was chosen, every pause intentional. Her shoulder throbbed now, heat radiating under the skin, but she ignored it. The desert punished distraction. The radio crackled again. A different voice this time, calm, educated, English with an accent she recognized from joint training years earlier. "She is not dead." Sarah almost smiled. The man coordinating the hunt understood what wounded operators did when left alone. They didn't panic. They adapted. Blood trails were tools. Fear was leverage. He warned his patrols to pull back, to stop chasing the obvious signs. Some listened. Some didn't. Arrogance killed faster than bullets. By nightfall, she'd put miles between herself and the crash site. The heat bled away with the sun, dropping fast enough to shock the body. Desert rule number 1: what tries to cook you by day will freeze you by night. Sarah found shallow cover beneath a rock overhang just big enough to break her thermal signature. She didn't light a fire. She didn't sleep. She let herself remember instead. Hell Week, black water swallowing her whole, instructors screaming inches from her face, waiting for weakness, waiting for the bell to ring. She looked around at the men beside her, some sobbing, some staring into nothing, and felt the same weight she felt now, the certainty that quitting would be easier. She hadn't quit then. She wasn't quitting now. The radio hissed intermittently as patrols reported in. Negative contact, expanding grid, thermal scans showing nothing. The calm voice cut through it all, precise and unhurried. "She is hunting you," he reminded them. "Act accordingly." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. He was right, but hunting required energy, and energy required water, and water required risk. She studied the map she'd taken, committing routes and wells to memory by red-filtered light. Resources clustered where people clustered. If she could disrupt the water, she could control movement. Her shoulder burned hotter now, the pain no longer sharp but deep and throbbing. Infection. She knew the signs. She cleaned the wound as best she could with scavenged supplies, jaw clenched against the pain. No antibiotics, just discipline and luck. Luck had never been something she relied on. She allowed herself 15 minutes of rest, no more. Microsleep, a trick learned in training, enough to reset without surrendering awareness. When her eyes opened again, the sky was paling at the edges. Time to move. She reached the abandoned ranch just after dawn. Old structure, 1 truck, 4 men inside. She watched them for long minutes through her scope, reading posture and rhythm. 2 awake, 2 asleep, comfortable enough to be careless. She didn't rush. She turned their water into a weapon. The explosion was brief, final. She didn't linger, she never lingered. She took what she needed and vanished before the echoes faded. More water, food, ammunition she couldn't use but might repurpose later. And something else. An encryption card. Her heart kicked harder this time. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was leverage. With this, she could hear everything, maybe even reach out, maybe even call home. But she knew the cost. Using it would light her up like a flare. She weighed the decision carefully, fever fogging her thoughts just enough to make it dangerous. She tried the channel anyway, clear, precise, authentication perfect. Nothing answered. Then the familiar accent returned, smooth and almost amused. "I was hoping you'd try that." She listened as he explained the jammer, the range, the inevitability. He wasn't taunting her. He was educating her, soldier to soldier. And then he did something worse. He told her the truth. About her wound, about her ammunition, about the math. "You are exceptional," he said, but you are still one person." She could hear it in his voice, not contempt, not cruelty, respect, and something like regret. He offered surrender again, not as a threat, as an outcome. She didn't hesitate. "Tell your team I'll be waiting." The silence afterward was heavier than any gunshot. Sarah leaned against the ranch wall as the fever surged, vision blurring at the edges. She breathed through it, grounding herself in sensation. The grit under her fingers, the weight of the rifle, the steady beat of her heart. She wasn't fighting for medals, or headlines, or to prove anything to anyone watching from a safe distance. She was fighting because she'd been trained to protect the space between chaos and the people who couldn't defend themselves. Because someone had once told her that quitting was the only real failure. Because retreat didn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it meant surviving long enough to fight again. And somewhere out there, a man who understood that truth better than most was tightening the net. The desert waited. So did she. Why did she start planning her own death the moment the sun climbed high? Sarah McKenna felt it before she admitted it, the slow betrayal of her body. Not panic, not fear, something quieter, a creeping heaviness behind the eyes, heat that didn't match the air. The wound in her shoulder pulsed like it had its own heartbeat, angry and insistent, as if reminding her that time was no longer theoretical. She had won ground, she had water again, she had ammunition, intelligence, momentum. And still she was losing. The desert didn't care about tactics. Infection didn't care about willpower. Survival wasn't heroic, it was biological, and biology always collected its debt. She forced herself to stay methodical. Panic was indulgent. Emotion was expensive. She cataloged what she had left the way she'd been trained to: liters of water, hours of daylight, rounds remaining, distance to the border. Everything became numbers. Numbers didn't lie. She moved again before noon, abandoning the ranch and the bodies and the brief illusion of control. She left signs behind, too obvious, intentionally sloppy. Blood-smeared bandages, empty bottles crushed underfoot, a trail that suggested confusion, dehydration, desperation. Make them think you're breaking. Her grandfather had taught her that one during a weekend she'd nearly passed out from heat exhaustion. Predators rush when they smell weakness, he'd said. Smart prey decides when to look weak. She led them away from the border on purpose. By mid-afternoon, the sun turned brutal, 115 degrees, the kind of heat that stripped thought down to instinct. She rationed water with ruthless discipline, small sips every half hour, enough to stay functional, not enough to feel human. The radio crackled constantly now, too constantly, voices overlapping, units repositioning, grid tightening. And underneath it all, his voice, calm, centered, always 2 steps ahead. He wasn't rushing her. That terrified her more than anything else. Colonel Anton Vulov knew how these hunts ended. He was patient enough to let the desert do most of the work. Men like him didn't need rage. They relied on inevitability. She found a ridgeline that afternoon and lay flat beneath sparse scrub, watching dust plumes in the distance. Vehicles, multiple, coordinated. They were adjusting to her patterns, learning. She smiled grimly. Good, let them learn the wrong lesson. Sarah doubled back under cover of heat shimmer, using terrain to erase her tracks. She circled wide, moving where the ground was too hard to hold footprints, where the sun baked everything into sameness. Her shoulder throbbed harder now, pain spiking with each movement. The fever came in waves, hot flashes followed by chills that made her teeth chatter even in the heat. She remembered Sear School then, the instructor's flat voices. Your body will lie to you, pain will lie to you, fear will lie to you. The only thing that doesn't lie is preparation. She whispered the words aloud, grounding herself. By dusk she had a new position, elevated, concealed, with long sightlines and multiple escape routes. She dug a shallow hide with her hands, ignoring the way her vision blurred when she bent forward. Blood soaked the bandage again. Too fast, too much. She replaced it anyway. The first night after that was the worst. The desert cooled rapidly, stealing the heat from her bones. The fever made the cold feel sharper, crueler. She wrapped herself tight and forced stillness, scanning through night vision whenever the radio went quiet. At some point, exhaustion dragged her under. She dreamed, not of gunfire, not of blood, of water seeping up through sand as her grandfather dug patiently beside her, of his voice, steady and calm. "You don't survive by being harder than the desert," he said. "You survive by understanding it." She woke gasping, heart racing, disoriented for a dangerous second before training snapped her back. She checked her surroundings. Nothing had changed. That realization hurt more than the dream. Just before dawn, the radio crackled with a new directive. All units converge, target showing signs of deterioration. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. They knew. She had two choices now. Keep running until her body failed somewhere anonymous and quiet, or stop running and decide where this ended. She chose the third option. She went on the offensive. The abandoned ranch wasn't just shelter, it was an opportunity. She returned to it carefully, approaching from a direction no one would expect. The heat had driven patrols to rotate. They assumed she'd pushed farther south. Assumptions killed. She turned the house into a weapon. Every door, every window, every approach wired with care. Not hurried, precision mattered. She worked slowly, deliberately, resting when the fever threatened to steal her focus. Grenades repurposed, trip lines hidden, claymores angled for maximum effect. By the time the sun reached its peak again, the ranch wasn't shelter. It was a message. She planted evidence of collapse, blood, discarded gear, signs of confusion. A trail that led away, sloppy and desperate. She wanted them to believe she was dying. Because she was. But not on their terms. She moved to her final firing position, a quarter-mile away, elevated, concealed. She dug in and waited. The wait stretched into hours. Heat, thirst, pain, the slow ticking of time inside her skull. She thought about her team then, about Grant's laugh, Hayes' quiet competence, the weight of knowing she'd survived when they hadn't. Survivor's guilt crept in, uninvited and sharp. She pushed it down. This wasn't about deserving. The desert didn't award fairness. At 3 in the afternoon, the convoy appeared. Multiple vehicles, organized, careful, and at the center of it all him. She recognized Vyulov immediately. He moved differently, calm, confident, unhurried. He stopped his team short of the house and studied it through binoculars. Sarah held him in her scope. She could take the shot. One squeeze, end the hunt, end the pressure. Her finger rested on the trigger. She didn't fire. Killing him wouldn't save her. It would only turn the remaining men into chaos she couldn't control. He spoke then, his voice coming through her radio like he knew exactly where she was. "This place is a trap." Her jaw tightened. He gestured and his men adjusted, spreading out, careful now, professional. He wasn't angry, he wasn't surprised. "I know you're listening," he said calmly. "I know you're watching." She stayed silent. "I don't want this to end with you bleeding out alone," he continued. "Not after what you've done." She felt something twist in her chest. Not hope, something more complicated. He talked about honor, about codes, about warriors who fought for memory instead of flags. She listened, fever making his words feel unreal, distant. Then he did something that stopped her breath. He offered her a radio. Not surrender, not capture. A way out. He set it down and withdrew his men. Sarah stared at that radio long after the vehicles disappeared. Using it meant admitting limits. It meant trusting an enemy. It meant surviving by accepting help. She thought about Chasen Reservoir, about men surrounded who fought their way out not by pride, but by coordination, about what her grandfather had really taught her. Courage isn't refusing help. It's knowing when to take it. The sun began to sink, painting the desert red and gold. Sarah waited. The choice would come soon. And whatever she decided, the desert would witness it, silent, indifferent, eternal. Why did her hands shake when she finally reached for the radio? Sarah McKenna stared at the small, battered handset like it was a live grenade. It sat on the rock where Colonel Vulov had placed it, catching the last amber light of the sinking sun. No wires, no obvious traps, just plastic metal and a choice she'd spent her entire career avoiding. Asking for help. Her shoulder burned hot beneath the bandage. The fever had settled into her bones now, making everything feel slightly delayed, like she was moving through water. She could still function, but she knew the margin was gone. One bad decision, one stumble, and the desert would take the rest. She scanned the horizon again. No movement, no dust trails. Vulov had pulled his men back far enough to give her space. That alone told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a trick. It was respect. The kind that only came from understanding what the other person had endured. Sarah crawled forward, slow and deliberate, rifle covering the open ground. She reached the radio and stopped, breathing hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She thought about her team, about the call she never got to make for them, about the extraction that left her bleeding in the sand. She picked up the radio. Her thumb hovered over the transmit button. For a long moment she couldn't press it. Pride flared, useless, stubborn, dangerous. She had survived this long on her own. She could keep going. She could disappear again. But disappearing wasn't the same as surviving. She pressed the button. "This is McKenna." Her voice sounded thinner than she wanted, rough from dehydration. She forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly. There was no immediate reply. Then the channel clicked open. "Sarah," Vulov said, using her first name like it was something earned, not stolen. "I'm glad you chose to live." The words hit her harder than any insult could have. She swallowed. "You said you'd give me a way out," she replied. "I'm listening." He didn't rush. He explained the conditions carefully. A narrow window, a safe corridor, no weapons, no men close enough to spook her. He'd marked the path himself. If she deviated, the offer vanished. "You trust me," she said quietly. "I trust soldiers," he answered, "even when they're on the wrong side of a border." She almost laughed at that, almost. They ended the transmission without ceremony. No threats, no speeches, just two professionals agreeing on terms in the middle of nowhere. Sarah sat back against the rock as the adrenaline faded, leaving only pain and exhaustion in its wake. Her hands shook now, uncontrollably. She tucked them under her thighs and waited for it to pass. The walk nearly killed her. Every step sent knives of pain through her shoulder and down her spine. Her vision tunneled more than once, the edges darkening as her body threatened to shut down. She counted steps, 10 at a time, then 10 more. She stopped when she had to, not when she wanted to. Halfway through, she collapsed to her knees, retching dryly into the sand. Nothing left to give. She pressed her forehead into the dirt and breathed through the dizziness. "This is how it ends," a voice whispered. She ignored it. She stood again. The marker appeared just before full dark, a chem light placed exactly where Vulov said it would be. She followed them one by one, green ghosts leading her through the desert like breadcrumbs. The corridor felt unreal, like walking through a dream she might wake up from at any second. She never saw Vulov's men, but she felt them, watched, ready. When her legs finally gave out for good, it was gentle hands that caught her, not rough, not hurried. She tensed automatically, instincts flaring, but the voices were calm. "You're safe," someone said in accented English. "We've got you." She wanted to argue, to insist on handcuffs, on procedure, on anything that would make this feel earned instead of given. But her body didn't wait for permission. She slipped into darkness. She woke to white light and the steady beep of a monitor. For a terrifying second, she didn't know where she was. Then the smell hit her, clean, sterile, not desert, not dust, not blood. A field hospital. She turned her head and winced as pain flared. Her shoulder was wrapped tight, an IV running into her arm. Antibiotics, fluids, real medicine. Relief washed over her so suddenly it brought tears to her eyes. She hadn't realized how close she'd been. A medic noticed her movement and leaned in, speaking softly, explaining where she was and what had been done. Severe infection, dehydration, heat injury. Another 12 hours out there and the outcome would have been very different. Sarah listened quietly, absorbing it all without comment. Later, Vyulov came. He stood just inside the doorway, hands visible, posture relaxed but respectful. No guards with him, no weapon drawn. He looked older up close, tired, the kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep. "You fought well," he said simply. "So did you," she replied. They shared a moment of silence that felt heavier than conversation. There were 100 questions she could have asked, 100 accusations she could have thrown. She asked none of them. "Why help me?" she finally said. He considered the question carefully. "Because war takes enough from us already," he said, "and because I didn't want this to end with your name becoming a footnote." She nodded slowly. They didn't shake hands, they didn't smile. But when he left, she felt something ease inside her chest, not closure, but understanding. Repatriation was quiet. No cameras, no ceremony, just paperwork, flights, long hours staring out of windows while the world moved beneath her. The debriefs were thorough but respectful. Her story spread through classified channels, stripped of emotion and reduced to lessons learned. She answered every question honestly. Yes, she'd accepted help from an enemy. Yes, she'd trusted him. Yes, she'd do it again. Recovery was slower than she expected. Infection left scars deeper than skin. Nights were the worst, waking up cold, heart racing, convinced she was still alone in the desert. She didn't talk about it much. One afternoon, weeks later, a small package arrived with no return address. Inside was a metal, old, foreign, worn smooth by time. A note, handwritten and brief. "Respect recognizes respect." She closed the box and sat quietly for a long time. Survival hadn't come from firepower or defiance. It had come from knowing when to stop fighting the wrong battle. And learning that sometimes, strength isn't standing alone. It's choosing to live when pride tells you to fall. Why did coming home feel harder than being left behind? Sarah McKenna learned quickly that survival didn't end when the shooting stopped. The desert had been simple in its cruelty: heat, thirst, enemies you could see if you were careful enough. Home was different. Home was quiet, and the quiet had a way of reaching places bullets never touched. The first time she stood unassisted, her legs shook like she'd run a marathon. The infection had retreated, but it had taken something with it: strength, certainty, the illusion that she could push through anything if she just tried hard enough. The doctors were optimistic. "You'll recover fully," they said, like it was a destination instead of a process. She nodded, she always nodded. Rehabilitation was humbling. Learning to trust her shoulder again. Learning to lift without flinching. Learning that pain now arrived without warning and lingered longer than it should. She'd been trained to endure, not to heal. Endurance had rules. Healing required patience, and patience felt like surrender. She hated that. The nightmare started before the physical therapy ended. Not the dramatic kind, no screaming, no vivid firefights, just moments. Waking up convinced she'd forgotten something critical. A canteen left behind. A teammate waiting for a signal that never came. Sometimes she woke with the taste of sand in her mouth, heart hammering, convinced the ceiling above her was sky. She didn't tell anyone at first. Strength, she'd learned, was often confused with silence. The official debriefs came next. Windowless rooms, neutral faces, voices that never rose or softened. They asked her to walk them through every decision, every deviation, every moment she'd been alone. She answered calmly, carefully, the way she'd been trained. She explained the radio, the corridor, Vyulov's offer. A pause followed that explanation every time. "You trusted him," someone finally said, not accusing, just confirming. "Yes," she replied. Another pause, longer this time. They didn't call it a mistake. They didn't call it misconduct. But she could feel the discomfort settle in the room like dust. War had rules people liked to believe were clean and straight. Her survival curved around those rules in ways that made people uneasy. She understood it didn't bother her. What bothered her was the empty chair at the end of the table. The one that should have been filled by someone who hadn't made it out. She was cleared for limited duty months later. No fanfare, no headlines, just a quiet return to a world that had kept turning while she'd been fighting to stay alive. People treated her differently now, careful, reverent, like she might break if they spoke too loudly. She wanted to tell them she'd broken out there, not here. One afternoon, she stood at the edge of a training range, watching new candidates cycle through drills. Their movements were sharp, eager, their mistakes obvious. She recognized herself in them, the certainty, the hunger, the belief that preparation made you invincible. It didn't. A young woman caught her eye, slight build, focused, jaw clenched in that familiar way people did when they were trying not to be noticed, trying to prove something quietly. Sarah watched her longer than she meant to. Later, the instructor asked if she wanted to speak to the group, share her experience, inspire. Sarah hesitated. She wasn't sure she believed in inspiration anymore. Stories had a way of sanding down the edges, turning suffering into something neat and digestible. She didn't want to be a lesson that skipped the cost. But she remembered the desert, the radio, the choice. She agreed. She didn't talk about kills, or tactics, or endurance. She talked about fear, about being left behind, about how the bravest decision she'd made wasn't pulling a trigger, but pressing a button and admitting she couldn't survive alone. The room was quiet when she finished, not the uncomfortable kind, the listening kind. Afterward, the young woman approached her, eyes bright with questions she hadn't asked out loud. "Did it change you?" she asked finally. Sarah thought about it. "Yes," she said, "but not in the way people expect." She didn't explain further. The package arrived weeks later. It was waiting on her kitchen table when she came home one evening, the return address blank. She knew what it was before she opened it. Some instincts didn't fade. Inside was the metal again, clean this time, polished just enough to catch the light. Beneath it, a second note. "Survival is not betrayal." Her throat tightened. She sat down heavily, the weight of the words settling into her chest. For a long time she'd carried a quiet shame she couldn't quite name. Not guilt, something adjacent. The sense that surviving when others didn't require justification. The note didn't erase that feeling. But it softened it. She placed the medal in a drawer, not hidden, not displayed, just kept. Some things weren't meant to be seen. They were meant to be remembered. On her next evaluation, the question finally came. Would you go back? It wasn't phrased as a challenge, just a fact to be clarified. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She thought about the desert, about the silence, about the moment she'd chosen to live. "Yes," she said finally, "but differently." They didn't ask her to explain. She walked out of the room lighter than she'd entered it. Later that night, lying awake, she realized something that surprised her. She wasn't afraid of being left behind anymore. She was afraid of leaving something unfinished. And for the first time since the desert, That fear felt like purpose. Why did the memory of the desert return the moment everyone stood up? Sarah McKenna felt it in her chest before she understood it, the sudden stillness, the weight of attention shifting in her direction. Chairs scraped softly against the floor, boots aligned without being told. No announcement, no order, just instinct. She remained seated for a second longer than everyone else. Not because she didn't notice, because part of her was still out there, lying against hot stone, counting breaths, deciding whether to live. She stood slowly. The room wasn't large, a quiet auditorium tucked away from ceremony and spectacle. No cameras, no press, just faces she recognized and some she didn't. People who understood cost without needing it explained. People who knew that survival didn't always look like victory. She was there to observe. That was the official reason. A senior officer had asked her to sit in, to listen, to lend perspective if needed. She hadn't expected the moment to find her instead. A four-star general stepped forward. He didn't read from a card. He didn't use her rank at first. He spoke about a desert without nomming it, about a mission that went wrong without assigning blame, about a soldier left behind, not by negligence but by necessity, and what it meant when that soldier refused to become a casualty. When he finally said her name, it landed differently than she expected. Sarah McKenna. Not myth, not legend. Just a name. She walked to the front of the room with the same measured steps she'd used crossing that corridor months earlier. Calm on the outside, a storm of memory underneath. Heat, thirst, the radio in her hand, the decision that still echoed. The general saluted her. It wasn't for the kills, or the miles, or the endurance. It was for something quieter. For choosing to live without abandoning who she was. She returned the salute automatically, muscle memory steady, even as her throat tightened. The applause that followed was brief and restrained, the way professionals acknowledged one of their own. Afterward, there were no speeches from her, no expectation of words she couldn't fully trust yet. She shook hands, accepted nods, felt the weight of respect without being crushed by it. Later, alone in the hallway, the general stopped her. "You changed how we teach survival," he said. "Not the tactics, the mindset." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "How so?" He smiled faintly. "You proved that resilience isn't about refusing help. It's about choosing the right kind." She nodded. That felt true. Outside, the air was cool, nothing like the desert. She paused, breathing it in, grounding herself in the present. Her shoulders still ached sometimes. Some wounds never fully closed. She stopped wishing they would. That evening, she visited the training range again. The same young woman was there, improving, focused, steadier than before. Sarah watched quietly from a distance. This time, she saw something else in the recruits' faces. Possibility. Not invincibility, not bravado. Possibility. When she finally left, she didn't feel like she was walking away from something unfinished. She felt like she was stepping into the next phase of it. At home, she opened the drawer and took out the medal one last time. She turned it over in her hands, then placed it beside her own, not above, not below. Equal. She thought about Vyulov, about respect that crossed lines drawn by policy but understood by soldiers, about the strange clarity that came when survival stripped everything else away. She didn't romanticize it anymore. She honored it. Before bed, she stood at the window and looked out at the quiet street. No dust, no engines, no radio crackle, just night. She slept without dreaming for the first time in months. In the morning, she would train others, guide them, teach them to read terrain, to manage fear, to recognize when pride became a liability. She wouldn't teach them how to be heroes. She would teach them how to come home. Because sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't charge forward or demand recognition. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.